While he's getting my PowerPoint up there, so we're going to talk about the Roseville Railyard explosions of 1973. So I want to ask first, who was here at the time? Who experienced it? Okay, Kay, you in back? Okay. Any near misses or close calls? Or?
I worked there on the grader.
Oh, at the Railyard?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
And those bombs that we picked up with loaders, you know, laid on that song about, oh, well, there's one bad day, you gotta watch it. But we picked them right up just like that.
Okay, so at the end of the talk, I'll have time for you to share, and anybody else who wants to share a personal experience that you had. In fact, I got to tell you that my talk on this has evolved because every time I give the talk, somebody shares information that I don't have, and I add it to the presentation, so you have the benefit of all the information that I've gotten from the previous talk. So it's gotten better as it goes along. So I'd really like to hear your story at the end of the presentation. So we're going to start with the Citrus Heights Battalion Chief Lloyd Patterson. Part of Lloyd's job duty was to inspect new fire stations. And on Saturday morning, April 28th, 1973, his job was to inspect a brand new fire station in Antelope, California. Now, they had a fire station previously in Antelope. Can everybody see the screen okay? Is it? Okay. So this is the first iteration. This was a private citizen's barn. He was enamored by fire engines, and he told the fire department, hey, you can park your fire engine in my barn. And they slapped a sign on the barn, and that was the first fire station in Antelope. But then they decided they needed a purpose-built station. And so the photograph is not too good. But there's a truck room on the left with 2 fire engines, and there's 2 mobile homes on the right for the 2 firefighters who lived at the station. And the 2 firefighters were fireman Steve Rogers, who was single, and he lived in one mobile home by himself, and then Lieutenant Farrell Grundy, who was married, and he lived in the other mobile home with his pregnant wife, Kathy. She was 5 months pregnant at the time of the explosions. Now, there was really no reason to have a fire station in Antelope at the time. In 1973, the west side of the railroad tracks, that's all that was there. It was just open fields, very few structures, and the town of Antelope itself only had about 30 buildings and 100 people. This is the general store / post office. So there's still not enough over there to justify having a fire station. So why did they have a fire station there? Well, this is why. There was no bridge over the railroad tracks at the time. This is the at-grade crossing on Antelope. This car is coming from Citrus Heights going to Antelope, traveling westward. If you were in an emergency vehicle responding to an emergency where that car is and you had a freight train coming by, there goes your response time. So that was the reason they had a fire station in Antelope, was just for the response time. Now, it provided a little bit of a problem in that it was so quiet and calm over there that in the fireman's bulletin in January 1973, it said that dedication is the name of the game for the men of Station 6 because the rural location does not provide much in the way of glamour and excitement, unless you consider counting freight trains or watching cans being recycled exciting. So they were kind of like, the Maytag repairmen. They were just kind of out there by themselves. And then in another Citrus Heights bulletin, this was in April, there is big news at Station 6. They have a new mailbox. So mail can be delivered directly to the station, and they are asking everyone, would you please drop us a line so we can use our mailbox? And then they apologize. Sorry, this is all the news for this month. Hopefully next month we will have a call we can brag about. That is, if everything goes right. Okay, the rest is history. So now, Farrell Grundy, he estimates at this time in 1973 at the main Station 21 fire station that's on Greenback and Mariposa that's still there, they were getting an average of 17 calls a week. In Antelope, they were averaging 1 call a month. Some months they would get no calls at all the entire month. So this poor fireman, nothing to do over there. So this shows you a little bit of the layout of the of Antelope and the railroad yard. You can see Antelope is on the upper left, Roseville is upper right, Citrus Heights is down below. The at-grade crossing that we showed in the earlier picture is right here. And the fire station was located right there, sandwiched in between North Antelope Road and the railroad tracks. Now the railroad cars with the munitions, the bombs on board, were parked on track number 7, right about there. So it was pretty close to the fire station. Sorry, I need a third hand here. So on the morning of April 28th, Grundy and Rogers heard a small explosion. Lieutenant Grundy had served a tour of duty in Vietnam in the infantry, so he is very familiar with explosive ordnance. And he said it sounded like a small mortar shell exploding. It was a very small explosion. So the two of them went outside, and this is basically what they could see. They just the boxcars that were closest to the station. But over those boxcars, they could see some flames and a little bit of smoke coming up. So they knew that something was going on that they needed to check out. So Fireman Rogers called into the dispatch office to get a fire truck out there. And while they were waiting for the fire truck, they decided that they would go check out what was going on. So they took their fire truck from the station and drove down to a point where they could get in between the railroad tracks. And so they parked there and they went out. Now the Little Red Box is what they call a herder's shanty where SP workers stayed. And they found an SP worker walking out, and they stopped and they had a chat with him to find out, hey, what's going on in there? Do you know anything? The worker really didn't know. He knew there was a fire, but he didn't really know what it was, what was causing it. Well, what was causing it, what they were walking into was this. These are Mark 81 250-pound general purpose bombs that are being loaded onto an airplane. Now, these bombs that were in the Roseville yard had been manufactured in Hawthorne, Nevada, and they were being shipped by rail from Hawthorne over to Oakland, where they were ultimately destined for Vietnam. But there were 21 boxcars that had 336 bombs each, so there was about 7,000 of these bombs in the rail cars parked in the Roseville Railyard. This is what they look like loaded in the boxcars. They're packed very tight, very securely. They're shipped without fuses, so there's no potential for accidents. Now, of the 21 cars, 3 got separated. They couldn't fit all the cars on one track, so they split the train up, and 3 cars got moved over, and they were not involved in the explosions. But of the 18 that were, they had about a little over 6,000 of the 250-pound general purpose bombs on board. Now, it was a good thing that Grundy and Rogers stopped to talk to the SP workers, because while they were talking, at about 8:04 a.m., the first large order explosion occurred, and it knocked them all to the ground. If they had gone in any further, they would have died. And so when they picked themselves up and collected themselves, the first thing they did was they had to get back to the station for Grundy's wife, Kathy.
I'm just curious, where is this picture taken? And man, how lucky was that to have taken the picture right there?
Oh, there's a lot of these. And this was taken probably east of the rail yard. So it's looking west. You can see the line of cars there. I don't know the exact location that it was taken, though. So they got back to the Station 6 to rescue Kathy. Unfortunately, Station 6 was already gone. And so those are the crumbled remains of the mobile home that Kathy was in, and there was no sign of Kathy anywhere. And so Grundy and Rogers went looking around for her. They found her across the street in this field, just kind of dazed and in a state of shock. And what had happened was this band of metal here is actually a piece of a boxcar. Farrell told me that there was actually the coupler is still connected to this, And what he thinks is that this piece of metal tore through the mobile home and narrowly missed Kathy, almost killed her, but at the same time it saved her life, because it tore a hole in the mobile home that she was able to just run right out in her bare feet before the whole thing collapsed around her. So they got Kathy, and then just about this time, up shows Battalion Chief Patterson. "I'm here to inspect the station." Well, he's a little late. But anyway, I think he probably knew what was going on when he was driving up. And so he told Lieutenant Grundy, he said, "Hey, get your wife to the hospital." And he stayed on site there with the other fireman, Steve Rogers, and they waited for the other fire trucks to arrive. Now, meanwhile, inside the SP Railyard, we have Gary Putman is the senior ranking supervisor who was on duty at the time. And he was doing a double shift. He was just finishing up a graveyard shift that was ending at 8 a.m. when that first explosion and fire occurred. Somebody reported it to him, and he dispatched a SP fire truck and fire crew to go check it out. Now, he knew there was a munitions train in the yard, but he didn't know where it was in relation to the fire that was going on. So he had his firemen go out to stop the fire before it got to the munitions car. Now, Gary, too, had served in Vietnam. He was a door gunner on a Huey helicopter. And so he was very familiar with what explosions, bombs sounded like. And so a few minutes after he dispatched his fire crew, the first large order explosion occurred. And even though he was 3 miles away, he was at the other eastern end of the rail yard. He heard it loud and clear. He knew what it was. He knew the munitions train had exploded. And he said his heart just sank because he knew he had just sent his fire crew to their deaths. And he was, just a few minutes later though, he was so relieved when he got a call from one of his fire crew. An incoming train had blocked their access and saved their lives. So they weren't able to get it in close enough to get hurt. Now at this point I was interviewing Gary. Actually, Gary lives in Orangevale, not too far from here. He's lived here almost all his life. And I was interviewing him, and at this point I was really disappointed because I thought, well, he's right in the heart of what's going on. He knows what's happening. He's probably got all these great stories. And I said, "Okay, Gary, well, what happened after that?" And he said, "Well, my men and I went back to work." And I'm like, "What?" I said, your rail yard is exploding. You just go back to work?" He said, "Yeah, we had a lot of work to do. And there was nothing we could do." So that was it. That was all he had to say about the explosions. That was all his involvement with it, too. And it was pretty much the same for the firefighters, too. When Lieutenant Grundy came back to Antelope after dropping his wife off at the hospital, he met up with the other firefighters, and they had formed a perimeter to keep people away from the explosions, but there was nothing they could do either. Except, as you can see, they're standing around watching the bombs go off. And so from about 8 a.m. in the morning when the first explosion occurred to about 10:30, that's when all 18 of the boxcars exploded with those very large order explosions. This is one here exploding, and you can see what looks like matchsticks right here are actually the wooden planks of the floor of the boxcar. These boxcars were made in the early 50s, and they had wooden floors, which we'll talk about a little bit later. But that's the flooring of the boxcar exploding. And so for the first 2.5 hours, there were some very large explosions. In addition to, according to Gary, there was propane cars in the area too that created some equally large, if not larger, explosions. But then what happened was, because the bombs were shipped unfused, they would not explode on contact. So quite a few of the bombs were blown free from the immediate area and landed in the fields around the rail yard, like this one in the foreground here. So for the next day and a half, what happened was these unexploded bombs that had landed in the fields when the field would catch on fire, then the heat from the fire would make the bomb explode. And so they kept exploding periodically until Sunday at a little after 4 o'clock. In addition, like if you notice, the one here has broken open, and a lot of these did break open and the explosive material just went all out over the ground. So there were multiple agencies that responded. In fact, there were 9 different agencies and sheriff's departments, Citrus Heights Fire, Red Cross, Emergency Services, and the National Guard. And they all formed their headquarters at Rush Park in the administration building. And then again, there wasn't much they could do other than to keep people out. And they also created an evacuation zone. Within a 2-mile radius, they evacuated everybody in the neighborhoods. And they set up evacuation centers like this one that's at San Juan High School in the cafeteria. Although from talking to people, I think most of everybody that was evacuated would wait the time out at a friend or relative's house. Now these are just, some of my favorite pictures of the explosions. This one here again, you can see it's a boxcar exploding from all the wood planks that are going up in the foreground there. But notice the people in the foreground. You can just, even though they're closer than the explosion, they're dwarfed by the explosion. You can get a sense of the size of the explosion, and you also get a sense that these people might just be a little too close. Yeah. And one of the reasons I like this photo is that the Citrus Heights Fire Bulletin ran this photo in their June edition, and I love the caption that they put on it. They said, "Some of the many people whose curiosity exceeded their intelligence." And it really did, because these people, they could have been killed by the shrapnel that was falling around them. So. Now these guys are a little smarter. They remember that duck and cover thing from grade school, so they're trying to take cover, but they're still too close to be really safe. Now this picture I like is, notice the car in the foreground. Doesn't it look like they just pulled into a drive-in movie theater? And they're sitting in the front seat watching the movie, and you can just visualize the cooler in the back seat of the car with the drinks and the snacks in it. And they're just having a good time watching the bombs go off. Now there's a 7-Eleven, it's still there on Antelope, just a little bit west of the freeway. And it was one of the first businesses built there in the 70s. And this day, though, was probably, I'll zoom out a little bit, not a good day to go to the 7-Eleven for a loaf of bread here. And they suffered a lot of damage in the store because of its proximity. Now, let's look get a bird's eye view here. You can see, the 2-mile area, the red circle, that area was evacuated. But you can also see in 1973, look at how sparse the development is. West of the tracks, there's almost nothing over here. In Citrus Heights, you have just a few new developments that are being built. If this had happened today, it would be a completely different story. You'd have a lot of people that would have been killed. And you can also see that it was really impacted Citrus Heights and Antelope, much more than Roseville. Roseville was at least a mile away for their closest development. Now, the National Guard and police formed a perimeter. Auburn Boulevard is the yellow line on the right and diagonal, and then it turns into Greenback Lane on the left over here. And I remember seeing National Guard soldiers with their military vehicles lined all up and down Auburn and Greenback. And it was kind of an eerie thing because it felt like you were in a war zone, with all this military presence and bombs going off. And I lived just outside that 2-mile zone. So my parents and family and we weren't really impacted. We wouldn't have to evacuate. But here I am with my mom and dad. And for someone though who turned 18 years old 2 miles away is just way too far from what's going on. So I had to get in closer to see what was really happening. So I remember in the morning I drove down Antelope going west, and they had Antelope blocked off at the freeway. You couldn't go any further. But then I noticed there were no cars on the freeway. The freeway was shut down in both directions. So I parked the car, and I was going to just walk across the freeway. And so I got about halfway across the freeway, and I got stopped by a highway patrol officer. He's going, So if he hadn't stopped me, I probably would have been in that other picture with all the people whose curiosity exceeded their intelligence. So anyway, that evening, my friends and I, we went to see a movie at the Sunrise Drive-In movie theater. I don't know if you remember that, over on Greenback and Fair Oaks. And that was kind of far away from the explosions, maybe 4 or 5 miles away. But I remember when you looked at the screen, you're facing west, and if you looked off to the right, we could see the orange glow of the bombs exploding in the distance. And it only took about maybe 20 minutes into the movie, my friends and I realized that we weren't really paying attention to the movie. We were watching to see the bombs going off, so we thought, well, what are we doing way back here? So we drove out and we went over to the Riverside Overcrossing over I-80. And the Riverside Overcrossing was just outside that 2-mile evacuation zone, so we could park there. It was a brand new overcrossing. They had just replaced an older one with a nice 4-lane with a big wide sidewalk. And so we just sat out there. We had a little elevated position there on the overpass. We could see right into the Railyard and watched all the bombs go off. And we had our little cooler next to us with our snacks and our drinks in it. So that was my experience of the Roseville Railyard explosion. Somebody who's far enough away that they feel safe, they want to get closer. But there were other people who had just the opposite experience, and we'll get into that next. As I mentioned, there's that one development off of Antelope, Saybrook Drive. It was a brand new housing development, and the houses there were less than a half mile from where the explosions were taking place. And in one of my previous talks, there was a gentleman who lived there as a child. He was about 11 years old, and he talked about his experience that day. It was almost a little funny. He was 11 years old, Saturday morning. What do? Saturday morning cartoons, of course. 8 o'clock in the morning, the Jetsons had just come on. So he's watching the Jetsons, when all of a sudden, the sliding glass door, the frame and window implodes into the house and lands on top of him. And he said he really didn't have time to process what was happening when the sliding glass door and the frame got sucked out of the house, and he went with it. Fortunately, as a little kid, you're pretty resilient, so he wasn't really hurt. But that was his experience of the Roseville bombs. There was another gentleman, too, who lived in that same neighborhood who I had a chance to interview more extensively. His name is Jeffrey Flores, and he lived right there. And when the bombs first went off, he was in a bunk bed with his siblings, and everybody was just thrown out of the bunk bed. There was shattered glass flying into the house. There were, again, whole window frames were imploding into the house. He said plaster was coming off the wall. There was insulation. He said it felt like the whole house was just collapsing around them. So he and his family ran out into the front yard, and there was a big tree in the front yard. This is Jeffrey today. A big tree in the front yard, and his family just hugged the tree because they had no idea what was going on. He said for 15 minutes, they were in absolute fear of their lives because they thought they were being attacked, and they didn't know who, they didn't know why, they had no information other than that their lives were in extreme danger. After 15 minutes, somebody came out with a transistor radio, and that's when they found out what was going on. Now, from Jeffrey's front yard, this is pretty much the view that he would have seen of the explosions. He has a very chilling description of the bombs going off. He said that first you would see the mushroom cloud going up, and he said it was completely silent. You would just see this cloud going up. And then after a few seconds, you would hear the deafening sound of the blast would just come at you. and then a few seconds later, you would feel the concussion of the blast hit you. And then he said after that, you would feel, you would hear this thunk, thunk, thunk. And he said the thunk, thunk, thunk was the sound of shrapnel landing around you. And it was very lethal, too. So this is an aerial view of his house at the time that this was happening. You can see the tree out in the front yard. And then you can also see that there's some smoke in the bottom of the picture. This is one of his neighbor's homes that got thunked. I mean, it got hit by a piece of hot shrapnel and it burned to the ground. So you can see two different pictures of it here. And according to Jeffrey, he saw let me back up. They were gathered around the tree in their front yard. He said his brother's car was parked just a few feet away on the street. A piece of shrapnel came down on the engine hood, and it went right through the engine block into the asphalt underneath the car. So eventually what happened was a highway patrol officer led them out to safety to get them away from the area. So after everything was, all the bombs had gone off, there was a pretty big mess to clean up. But fortunately, and I would say miraculously, there were no fatalities that we know of. And the injuries, 300, there was about 15 SP workers, and the rest were people, firefighters and other civilians that were injured, like people in Jeffrey's neighborhood. This is an aerial view of the Railyard that shows the extent of the destruction where the munitions train was parked. This is looking northeast towards Citrus Heights and Roseville. Roseville Road is in the background there. And then this shot here, you can see the craters that were left. This is where the freight cars were parked. They left a huge, like 20-foot deep crater where they were. And another SP worker, whose name is Mel Hightower, I interviewed him, and he was supervising the cleanup crew. And he told me that he lobbied as hard as he could to Southern Pacific to please try to find the bombs that were in the craters and in the area there and get them out. But SP told him, we're losing money by the hour, and we just got to get the trains running again. So they told him, just fill those holes in, get the tracks back, and let's get moving. So it ended up coming back to bite them because, as you know, that in the mid-90s, when they remodeled this Railyard, they found a lot of the unexploded bombs, right where Mel, told them that they would be. Mel also lives in Orangevale. So there was a lot of freight cars that were either destroyed or damaged, a lot of cleanup to do. But the poor little town of Antelope, oh my goodness. This is what's left of it. There were 32 structures at the time. About a third of them were completely destroyed, another third heavily damaged, and none of them escaped without some kind of damage. So Antelope was never quite the same again. In total, based on the claims that were filed against SP, or to SP, they estimate there was about 5,500 buildings that were damaged, mostly private residences, and most of it was pretty minor. This house is also in Antelope, that's why it's a... Fire Station 6 was completely gone. This is the foundation of the truck room that we saw earlier. There's nothing left of that. There was also a lot of the firemen's personal effects, the cars that were destroyed. The car on the far left belonged to Farrell Grundy. And then there were a lot of unexploded bombs that were just laying around. They estimate there was about 1,200 that they recovered just laying on the ground because they had, they didn't have fuses, so they didn't go off, and there was no heat to set them off. And in addition to that, as I mentioned before, there was others that had split open and the explosive content had spilled out. So somebody had to go around by hand and just pick all that up. So it was a pretty big mess. Southern Pacific estimated it cost them about $3.5 million in lost equipment and infrastructure, and the other damage claims came to $23 million. Of course, that's in 1973 dollars. Today, it would be more like $25 million and $166 million. That's what it cost. They did rebuild Fire Station 6. They rebuilt it to pretty much the same specifications as the original one, in a new location though. They relocated it about 1.5 miles away from the railroad tracks. And as you can see, they figured that a drive-in movie theater is much safer than railroad trains. And then most of the people who were evacuated were able to return immediately, except for Jeffrey and people in his neighborhood. Jeffrey's house was uninhabitable after the bombs went off. It took a month for them to rehab the house to where they could go back and live in it. So a month after the explosions occurred, Jeffrey and his family moved back into their home. Now, if you're an 11-year-old boy, what do you want to do? You want to go explore, which he did. So Jeffrey and his friends went all around to see what they could find. And lo and behold, right where that circle is, they found what he estimates between 3 and 4 dozen unexploded bombs just laying on the ground. Now, what do you do if you're an 11-year-old boy and you find unexploded bombs laying on the ground?
Get your matches.
Well, you want to bring one home. So they went home and they got his father's wheelbarrow and they brought it back, and they managed to get a 350-pound bomb into the wheelbarrow, but then the weight of the bomb just tipped the wheelbarrow over. So then they decided, well, the weight of the bomb was printed on the side of the bomb. So they said, well, let's go for a 250. So they got a 250-pound bomb in the wheelbarrow, and they had 2 kids on each handle of the wheelbarrow. But just at that time, a police car with its lights flashing was coming down Antelope from over the freeway. And when they saw the police car coming, they pretty much knew he was coming for them. So they decided to abandon. They just dumped the bomb off, and they were headed back with the wheelbarrow when Jeffrey came across this partial bomb that was lying on the ground, and it was light enough that he was able to pick it up and put it in the wheelbarrow and bring it back home. And it sat in his backyard for 50+ years. Until he decided to donate it to the Citrus Heights Historic Society. And now I have my lovely wife Maria here, who's going to play Vanna White for us tonight, and she's going to do the reveal. And there is the bomb that Jeffrey recovered from the field. And if you come up and take a look at it, I know I'm not a bomb expert, but I know most of them have 2 fuses. I believe that this little insert here that's threaded was meant for a secondary fuse, in addition to the one that would have been up here. But please come up and take a look at it. Now, what caused this whole thing? The accident investigation report came out about a year later. And of course, Southern Pacific was pointing the finger at the Navy. You made a bad bunch of bombs. And the Navy was pointing the finger at Southern Pacific and said, you have faulty railroad cars. And after they did a very extensive investigation, they came to the conclusion that we'll never really know for sure because all of the evidence was destroyed in the explosion. However, they do have what they feel is a most probable cause, and that was a design deficiency in the railroad car itself. If you remember that they had a wooden floor. This is looking underneath a boxcar. And then the wheel, when the brake was applied, there was a lot of sparks that would be emitted by the brake shoe on the wheel. And so they had a metal spark deflector to keep the sparks from hitting the wooden floor. However, if you notice that the spark deflector's not all that big, and so what they theorized is that enough sparks were able to make their way around that metal deflector that they ignited the wood floor of the boxcar. Especially coming down from the Sierra Nevadas, there's like a 14-mile stretch that the brakes are applied the entire time. Witnesses who observed this coming down from the mountain said they saw the wheels glowing red, which in itself is not a problem, but it shows you the kind of heat that it was producing and the sparks that were coming off of it. And they also had a similar accident in Arizona about a year later with the same kind of boxcar and bombs. And so they felt like it was a design deficiency. So as a result of this, they extended the metal plate over the entire width or length of the boxcar, so the sparks couldn't set the wooden floor on fire. So that's the end of the story. I'd like to acknowledge some people who provided the photos, and in particular the Pioneer Mutual Hook and Ladder Society. Randy Wooten, most of the pictures that you saw, he provided. Roseville Historical Society, they have a display and a lot of photos there. They also have their own bombshells. And then the others down here. And on our Citrus Heights website, we have a section on what I've just talked about. Some of the narrative and the pictures that I've shown here are on our website, including the final report, which you can read or download from our website, which is kind of interesting. It's a very objective read of what took place. So thank you very much. And now, first of all, who'd like to share a story or experience? I think you had. Okay.
I worked over there, and I was working up in Cameron Park, and then I got a call on the radio to send the motor grader over to Antelope. So I did, and then I expected the guy that took it over to run it all night, but he said I can't leave my wife alone at night, so I got stuck there, and that's what I was doing. Mostly just grading railroad ballast, they brought in on bottom dump railroad cars, and I kept blading it over and over to make another track over here. And I was pretty tired, so I got a flat tire because there was spikes all over, so I thought it'd take a little while to fix that. It took about 5 minutes. They put a whole new wheel on it. So, but anyway, everything went fine, so I got no complaints. I got a good paycheck too. Thank you.
So you're talking about during the cleanup you were grading the stuff?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Gene Kelly.
My brother lived in North Highlands, and it blew both his front doors off. Where did he live? North Highlands.
North Highlands, okay.
North Highlands.
Wow. All right, and then Larry, were you planning on doing some interviews in the near future? People, members?
Yes, yeah.
About that?
So what we want to do is we've interviewed some of the people, like Gary Putman, that were involved in this, and like I said, their stories end rarely abruptly, because while the whole thing was happening, they couldn't do anything. So what we want to do is to interview people who experienced, like you and me, who experienced this, and what their experiences were, because there's quite a variety from me, who it was a kind of a fun, exciting thing, to Jeffrey, that was a very life-threatening thing. And so we want to have like 1 or 2 days where we get a video camera, and I think Mark has agreed to let us do it in the museum. We'll advertise it ahead of time. that anybody who wants to share a story, you just come in at a certain time and we'll sit you down and let you share your story for a video camera, and then we'll collect all these together and make a short video out of them.
Any questions for?
Yeah, question. What did most of the observers, people around there, think happened? Did they think it was a nuclear bomb, or that we were being under attack from somebody? What was the perception?
Well, like I said, with Jeffrey and his family, they just had no idea. Until they heard on the radio what was going on. I think most people found out rather quickly, that it was the explosions in the Railyard. So it was only just that very short moment before they had any communication from the outside world. But they didn't, they just didn't know. Yeah. Kay.
Yeah, immediately it came on the radio. I lived on Sunrise at that time, and so we had, the windows did not explode, but you could just see them going in and out. I was in a laundry room with them right there. Stupid me, I stood there. But they didn't explode. But the thing that we really noticed is my husband was going to a meeting. We were driving down Highway 80, and he, of course, worked at the railroad at that time, and all he was thinking about was who had been killed that I worked with. You hear it on the radio. But what we were seeing coming up the freeway was nothing but ambulances and fire trucks. So when you say they called out all the, the auxiliary, areas, they really did. And that way, when we were driving on the freeway, we were thinking there's been just hundreds of people killed, from where it was. And of course, when I came back home after dropping my husband off, Sunrise was one of those that was blocked. So, yeah.
There are other stories too about very near misses. Like Jeffrey, who was in his bunk bed when the first bomb went off, and he said that just moments before that, his family was all gathered at the dining room for breakfast. And after breakfast, they decided to take a nap. Had they been in the breakfast table when the bomb went off, there was glass that just went through the whole dining room. It would have really, cut them pretty badly if they had been in there. So lots of near misses.
Yeah, I was just gonna add that, 6,250-pound bombs. That's like the entire ordnance that would have been dropped by a major B-17 raid during World War II. Would have dropped probably half of that. That's hundreds of airplanes. Now, in Vietnam, it was a little different. They had smaller, groups that went in, but those were designed to hit, large areas and totally wipe them out. That's a lot of ordnance going on.
Yeah, and amazing that nobody was killed.
Yeah, that is phenomenal.
Yeah.
That is just, we're very fortunate.
Did they have any idea how long those rail cars were sitting there before the fire got hot enough to make one go off?
It was not too long. The train had just come in that morning, so maybe about 6:30 in the morning it had arrived, and so it sat there for maybe an hour or hour and a half. And so during that time, the floor was smoldering, obviously, and then it just got to the point where it ignited enough to set the bombs off.
So those bombs, were that for B-52 bombers?
No, these are smaller. So I don't know if you saw the plane. It was kind of a small fighter type plane that they were fitting the bombs onto. So it was, too small for a B-52.
But B-52s could carry them. But
Oh, yeah,
they
they
carried
could.
them by the hundreds.
Oh, they could, yeah.
And,
But
but
it was a naval
250
report,
pound
so.
is a general purpose, weapon, large enough to do plenty amount of damage, but also small enough you can carry a number of them on a fighter.
Right.
They probably carried 10 or 12 or even more on some of the Vietnam era fighters, jet
Right.
fighters.
Right.
Alan?
Yeah.
I served in Vietnam on that infantry teams. The 250-pound bombs are basically F-4 bombs that are coming in from the 250-pound bombs, 500-pound bombs are like F-4 bombs that are coming in for close air support when we were in a firefight, right? You get up to B-52, then you're talking 1,000-pound bombs. Okay. But your description of the shrapnel and the concussion and everything, you know, I've seen it happen in combat situations, but brought back a lot of memories.
All right. We got everybody. Hey, I want a big round of applause for Larry. And the last few items, and then we'll get social time, and don't forget there's cookies and water, but Larry will be here, so you can come up. You probably don't want to like jam your arm on that, looks sharp and rusty, so be careful when being near the ordnance and whatnot, but don't forget, night at the museum, we've got flyers back there. We'd love everybody to get the word out, get some more sponsors, get the Amazon wish list filled out, get your tickets and all that, and then next month we are September. Oh, we have the Pioneer Days, so we have people coming in period costumes from the Pioneer Days of California, and they'll be sharing about a lot of the early settlers here coming into the state, or before it was a state. So that'll be a really good time next month at our members meeting, which will be here again, first Tuesday of the month. And 6 o'clock we open the doors, have social time, and then go from there. So with that, I think make sure you talk to Marilyn about membership, and again, get some cookies and socialize some more. We have the room till 8 o'clock. Thank you very much.